Welcome to the Private Lenders Podcast with your hosts from Hard Money Bankers, Jason Balin and Chris Haddon. This podcast is sponsored by HardMoneyMastermind.com.
Welcome back to the Private Lenders Podcast. Today's guest is Devon Kennard from 42 Solutions, a private lending company based out of Arizona. I'm going to let Devon do his intro here in a second, but we originally chatted via Instagram a few weeks ago to discuss a few things related to his private lending operation, and we kind of hit it off. Devon was then on our other podcast, Real Estate Investing Podcast, last week. If you're not familiar with that, you can check that out on Hard Money Bankers YouTube. And we learned a lot about his real estate investment portfolio. But today, we definitely want to focus on his private lending portfolio that he has grown here in the last year or so and discuss, his experience on the lending side. He also has a new book called Real Estate Side Hustle. I'm sure we're going to get into as well. Devon, thanks for joining Private Lenders Podcast. Maybe let's just start off with just a quick intro about who you are and how you got started.
What's up, guys? My name is Devon Kennard. I just retired from the NFL last year, and at the beginning of 2023, I've been investing in real estate for the last 10 years. As soon as I got out into the NFL after my rookie season, I bought my first property. I've been private lending for about 4 years, but I actually started my company last year, so it's been just about a year come this October. So that's been awesome. And yeah, I really love this side of the business. And it was kind of perfect timing because I kind of separate things from fast money and slow money. And football was my fast money for almost a decade. And I was trying to transition into what my fast money was going to be once I retired. And this private lending made a lot of sense for me. And the transition's been really impactful so far.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's been your biggest challenge so far as a hard money lender or private lender?
There's a lot of different ways you can structure your business. So I kind of dived in. Like I didn't know about you guys at Hard Money Bankers at first. So my first introduction into the right structure of building a business was Beth Johnson and Lynn to Live out of Seattle. There's Bigger Pockets book. So I read that. It gave me a good kind of infrastructure and the idea of like, okay, this is how you systemize the business. And I started that, was consuming a lot of content on private credit, private debt, how to do this, and just been growing in the space a lot over the last year. And I would say today, the biggest challenge for me is I'm really in the trenches of setting up my SOPs for the business, the operation side, exactly what my criteria is, what's the process, because for a while there, every loan felt a little different because I was like kind of figuring out what I wanted to do, listening to a lot of different voices. And now I feel like I'm to the point where I have a good idea of what I want to do, pulling, stuff from you guys, stuff from other people I've learned, and honing in on that. So that's been kind of my progression.
Yeah, it's crazy because, if you talk to a dozen private lenders or hard money lenders, we can use that term interchangeables, I guess, but everyone is just set up differently, and there's no right or wrong. I mean, maybe there's a wrong, but there's no right. Everyone's different of what they want to do. Some people have more capital than deals. Some people have more deals than capital. Some people want to be local. Some people want to be nationwide. So it's it's funny to just hear how lenders are originally set up and why it's set up like this. And, even us, like we have old habits that aren't necessarily good or bad habits. And it's just like, we just do it that way, because that's just the way that we do it, right? Like I'll give you an example. We collect construction draw fees for inspections on the front end. They're not rolled into the draw. And now some people might do this, some people might not do it. We've just always done that way, and we've charged that amount of how many draws up front, and it gets paid on the front end. And I know some people take it out on the back end. That's just how we do things. So again, there's no right or wrong. Was there anything that, as you kind of got started, that was just easier than you originally expected?
I would say people overemphasize the servicing aspect and learning about the industry a lot. Like there's third party servicing you could hire, and I was considering that for a while. But with the software companies that are out now, it is not all that daunting as people make it seem. I wouldn't be surprised if more smaller hard money and private money companies start to service their own stuff more and more, because I use Baseline software, and I can pull funds in a couple of clicks. So I'm like, why would I hire third party, lose control? So that was a surprise to me, in that I thought like, oh, to do it right, I need a servicing company and all that. And I have changed my perspective on that. I think that should be in-house, and there's the right companies and right software backing servicing that can help you do that expeditiously and still keep track of things really well.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, if you're newer to the lending space in general, like this business has evolved a lot over the last 10 years or so. Like when we started in 2007, really the only servicing company was the mortgage office back then. And they were the big one. They'd been around for a long period of time, and they weren't affordable for us. And, they're not affordable, I think for some private lenders as well as they're starting out. And, we band-aided spreadsheets and then, a server-based software that was crappy until we got to that point. So point being is stuff's evolving, and, that's a good thing, when companies put money into an industry. So where are you finding your leads? Are you doing mostly local stuff? Are you doing kind of stuff all over the country?
Yeah. So my strategy when I first got into the business was more so like, I have relationships with really good operators across the country. I'm going to specialize in identifying them, understanding their business model, their structure, and lending to them. So I was lending in multiple different markets. And honestly, you guys, and listening to every single one of your episodes, I literally listen to every one. You guys have shifted my mindset on that a lot. And now that I've retired, I'm more local in Arizona. My wife's an agent. I invest myself, so I have contractors here locally. It's a non-judicial foreclosure state, so the foreclosure process is easier. So there's just a lot of things that make lending in Arizona really beneficial to me. So I've kind of pivoted, and I'm going to shift my business to where that's where I'm primarily going to lend. And it has to make a lot of sense for me to lend elsewhere moving forward. But that's a shift though, because I originally thought like, hey, I'm going to get the top operators I know. I have a lot of contacts, and I'm going to do it anywhere. And I felt like I had a good idea. So what I would do, people would think that sounds crazy, but my mindset when I was doing that was like, I'm going to make them provide the contracting crews. So I want their A team, B team, and if there is a C team, I want all their contracting crews. I want their real estate agents. I want their title companies, to where if I ever had to take over the property, I have contacts in the city. I've usually visited at least once to the places, get an idea, get a feel for the level of rehabs they do, go tour some of their properties. So I felt I was doing it the right way. And it's not that I never will do that again, but I had too much of a distinct advantage lending in Arizona to not lean into that. So that's kind of my focus now.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, I know lenders that lend that nationwide. We've dabbled with doing stuff nationwide, and on a smaller scale, starting out, it's not an awful model, but stuff changes, right? And as you have a big enough portfolio, like you need to have consistency in it, or it's crazy. I mean, I don't know if you were flying out to look at every property, but like, and meeting vendors and stuff, but like that takes time, to do, and money. And as there's just different jurisdictions. Some states have licenses, some have different foreclosure types, some have commercial usury laws. Like it's hard to determine all that stuff, especially on a one-off deal. We kind of were always like, hey, we'd like to stay local, but if we choose, but like we're open to choosing other secondary markets, and if we choose those, like let's do it. Like let's go all in. Let's meet with legal counsel. Let's figure out if there's any lending laws we got to be required to do, because I think that's challenging. It takes a lot of work to do that, right? Unless you're local.
For sure. If you're a small enough shop, I mean, you can. I consider it kind of chasing the operators. Like you can chase the operators into their markets, but the thing is, you could lose a market quickly if they stop coming to you for funding and all of those things, to where, if I'm lending primarily in Arizona, now I can build a good Rolodex here locally. And, one thing that I kind of started to see is you start to have solutions. If one deal starts to go through default and I know other investors, I can be like, hey, I have this deal. Why don't you buy it from them? I'll fund it still. Like there's more creativity when you're local, and you can have more exit plans when things don't go right. So I like that aspect as well.
You're also in a market that has good price points in general. Obviously this business model works great in median housing price neighborhoods, but there's just certain markets in the country that the median housing price might only be 100 or 180 or $200,000. And, then your average loan's 80, 100, 120 grand. And, you could be in a market where your average loan is 3-4 times X that. And when we make our money on, lending out and it's on interest and fees, you make 3 or 4 times the amount of money doing the same amount of work. And, I've talked to a lot of lenders around the country that are in smaller markets that they know, and, they struggle. Sometimes they struggle because they're like, well, I have to do, 10 loans a month to make payroll and to do this because my loans are so small. And I get it. And that's just part of the business model that in essence you take. It's the same thing with like a real estate agent, right? Like real estate friends of mine that sell real estate in Washington, DC compared to Baltimore, they live 30 minutes apart, but they're make 3, 4, 5X the amount of commissions doing the same amount of work. So
that's a really good point, because I was running the math in Arizona, and my goal is to get my business to where I have 10 to 20 million dollars out at all times on a consistent basis, and at a 400K loan amount, we're really talking about 25 to 50 loans consistently. And there's some properties that are even more than that 400 range. So 25 to 50 loans out at any given time, that's manageable. I feel, and like that perspective gave me a lot of vision on like, okay, I can have less loans out here in Arizona than I would in some of the other markets that I started lending in, where it's like 100 or 200. So that's really appealing for sure.
Yeah, there's a lender in our mastermind group, and he's in a smaller market, and he's been trying to figure out ways to, in essence, get more money on his top end bottom line. And the solution was like, you already have a good book of business here. Like, let's try to focus on a different market and really learn that market, and don't jump in there fast. Start slow, do some deals there, and then diversify the portfolio. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't have there's also something to be said about don't having all your eggs in one basket either, or one market. As markets shift, I mean, we've seen markets where, during some of the cycles, some have been very affected while others have not been affected. So, it's good to be open-minded with all that. So I'm assuming, at the moment, are you completely self-funding this, or have you been raising capital?
I have a couple of investors, family and friends. I haven't really turned that faucet all the way up yet because I haven't needed to. I've been really kind of building out the infrastructure and lending my own capital up to this point. But I have, as of today, $3.5 million out on the street, and about 300 of that is investor capital, and the rest is personal capital. And I'm just going to methodically build it out and grow from there.
Yeah, I was going to ask like what you think your game plan would be, like if you try to self-fund as much as this as you can, or bring in friends and family, and obviously help them provide, giving them a good rate of safe return as well, and then you're helping yourself and you're helping other people.
One thing I know you guys talk about a lot is lending your own capital and what that can do for your portfolio and your return. And if I can get to $20 million and it's all my own, I would love that. But realistically, it'll be a blend between my personal capital, line of credit, because I have a portfolio of properties and I could use lines and different things like that, as well as investor capital, because I do want to give people I know an opportunity to be able to invest and get a really solid return. So I think a blend between those three things is gonna get me there and methodically kind of help me build the business. And that's what I'm looking forward to the most, because if I can put more of my own capital in, I could do 10 million instead of 20 million and still hit the income levels that I want. So I really like that idea.
Yeah, have less risk, less headaches. I mean, we've always thought about that as well. Like after, because we've been at this $50 million deployed for a long period of time, and it, ideally it'd be great if it was mine and Chris's only 50 million, but there's a lot of capital investors that are involved as well. And that one component of having a capital investor is the second half of our business, meaning like there's a lot that goes in that. I mean, we're managing investor capital. There's Chris in essence Like that's his full-time job inside our operation. I'm not, he's not necessarily doing keystrokes, but he's communicating with them, figuring out what investor is going in what deal and things like that. And we've always kind of had an opinion of like, well, when the time comes, you can do half as much business and, make the same amount of money. But there's also something to be said about taking care of capital investors, not just in real time, but in the future of, hey, they've been around with you for such long periods of time and they're used to getting, whatever, 10% rate of return. And you want to take care of them. Like they're happy. Like they've helped you grow this business. I mean, our capital investors have helped us grow this business. Maybe they haven't done the hand holding but they're enabling us to help deploy capital into with their capital. So it's kind of a beautiful thing when everything works out, right? You help real estate investors on the front end make money flipping houses, and you help investors on the back end. So it's,
I think that's been my biggest joy in it, is like you're helping a lot of people, solving a personal problem. You're helping the investors build wealth as far as the actual borrowers and who's doing the flips. So you're getting to help them build wealth and for their families. And then the passive investors who are lending through you and working with you as partners, funding these deals, they get a really good return on their money that's collateralized by assets. So I think it's a great balance, and I've been like really enjoying that aspect of thing of like it's really mutually beneficial for everyone involved.
What so what are kind of in your market, what do you think the going terms are, or what are the going terms these days? Like we're 12.993 points, typically a one year loan. Is that similar, lower, higher?
People are getting a little bit lower here. I'm seeing 10 to 12%, but we're talking about from the big Kiavis and stuff. They're here in this market pretty heavily. There's a couple of other big shop private hard money. There's one Capital Fund one. It's a big Arizona one. They're in a couple of different markets. So the terms are a little bit better on the hard money side, but I really pitch what I can provide in the sense of like, I'm here locally. It's my funds. I can fund quickly. So my fees are 12% and 2 points. And then I have a processing fee of $9.95, a draw request. I do it up front, similar to you guys, of $800 up front, and then a doc prep fee of $500. So those are the only, that and the origination of 2 points. Those are like my 4 fees. And I try to make it a really straightforward process. And there's some pushback. All 12's a little high, this and that. One thing I have added is I like the Dutch funding, which is essentially like if the property is 350, I'm funding it, let's call it 80% of the purchase and 100% of the rehab. And, I fund that, but I'm charging on the full rehab amount from day one. There's some, I started out not doing that because in my head, it made sense of like, oh, you should only charge on what you actually send them. But what I realized is I have to keep that money on the sidelines. And now I have the structure where I have like a separate trust account that's just really holding those funds. So that's not completely fair to me because I can't use it for anything else. So, so now I do what they call the Dutch funding, and, I get some pushback, but I think I'm showing my value. I've funded a deal in 2 days before. My wife's an agent here locally, so she's helping me comp stuff out. I know a contractor who kind of is like my inspector who would go and kind of give me an idea of if he thinks the budget is right for the project. So, I'm able to act really fast.
Yeah. And also, and I agree with that. I don't know any other way to do it. Mostly because again, you can't touch the capital, right? Like it's sitting there allocated for them, go ask. And this is actually an interesting, thing, like go ask a real estate investor that had 20 flips going on. What happened in March, 2020, right when COVID hit, they couldn't get construction draws. Like everything was frozen. People couldn't get construction draws. I don't even know if the money was even available, even if they wanted to. So like, and that didn't last long, right? That lasted 3 weeks before business as usual. Point being is like, be like, I tell the borrower and nobody ever asks, but if they did, it's like, I'd be doing a disservice if I didn't set it up like this, because what happens if you came to me and, we were out of business or something and we didn't have the capital, like the capital's got to be available for you. And also, one of the questions I asked the real estate investor up front is, hey, how long is it going to take to get draws and flip the property? And everyone thinks it's going to be significantly quicker than it really is. So then it's like, okay, well, let's do the math on that. The extra $40,000 I'm holding, like it's only going to cost you a few extra $100 and costs anyways. So, you know,
and that's what I tell my borrowers. You know, they have situations where it takes, you know, maybe a full 4 business days to get the draws. And now their contractor's a little upset